explained in your video that Gen X grandparents are not going to be like baby boomer grandparents, and you're darn right. What you don't know is that our parents were disciplinarians. We had chores, we had jobs at 14, whatever we wanted, we had to earn. And then at the ages of 18 and 21, we did something crazy. Come in close. We became independent and moved out. See, we know where we went wrong. It was that soft parenting. Timmy, you don't have to work because you're in sports. But now y'all think y'all supposed to live in our house until we 30. We pay y'all bills and take care of y'all kids? No. We'll see little Keisha every other Saturday. And when we're tired, she goes home. Yes, go home, take your cell phone bill back, take your insurance bill back, and no, we don't have $50 for you to hold until Monday. And as our parents told us, y'all had them kids. Work it out.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome back to the cruel, brutal, capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. Today is another post-weights cardio session. So I'm going to be doing a car park jog and talk video for you guys. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe. So I once had a colleague from South Africa who told me that when he was a little boy, he and his brother were left behind at the amusement park by their father because they failed to meet him at the designated time, at the designated place. Perhaps they got a little bit too carried away, and so he just left them at the amusement park and went home. And in order to get home, those two boys had to hitch rides in order to get home. And the way he framed it was not that this was a situation of abuse and negligence on the part of his father, but rather he framed it as if it were a tough love lesson in order to teach him responsibility. And not surprisingly, he himself admitted to me that he would ask his children to leave his house when they reach a certain age in order to teach them responsibility, financial responsibility and accountability. Now, to a typical Asian person, this sort of thing is unthinkable. Because in Asia, generally speaking, parents and children are very close to each other, and parents are very, very protective over their children. But maybe this is a cultural difference, but in Asia, if a parent has a child, and I speak from a Chinese Malaysian perspective, they never have a child unless they can guarantee that the child will have a good life. It's not inherently virtuous in our Chinese culture, and Peranakans, I guess you can say, are Chinese, Malayanized Chinese, but Chinese nonetheless, that if you have a child, you have to make sure you really want this child, and you're going to give this child a good life and a safety net. What I mean to say is that it's not inherently virtuous to have a child if you're only having a child for the sake of having a child, but you don't know if you can provide this child with a safety net and a good life. That's not inherently virtuous in our culture, right? But yeah, at least from my perspective, Chinese Malaysian parents are very, very protective over their children in general. And I think that applies to the majority of Asian parents as well. In fact, my ex-girlfriend had to be brought home by a certain curfew time when she was 26 years old. I had to bring her home by a certain time, and her father would be waiting at the door for her. He wouldn't be able to sleep, her parents wouldn't be able to sleep until she got home safe and sound. And she was 26, okay? So you can see how protective Asian parents are over their children. But you see, my ex-girlfriend isn't exactly a Peter Pan type that spends all day playing video games. Now, I play video games, but the point is she's a very successful psychologist. Technically, she could move out of the house if she wanted to at that time. But in Asian culture, we typically live with our parents until marriage and are happy to do so. Now, let's get back to this South African friend of mine. The South African colleague, not friend, colleague of mine, because I couldn't really be friends with a man who had such vastly different values from my Asian values, right? Let's call this person my colleague. He believed that in order to teach children responsibility, you have to do the so-called tough love parenting. That is to say, let them struggle and suffer, and kick them out of the house and let them pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And while it's true that some people manage to pull themselves out of grinding poverty, there is a reason why in the Western countries, such as America, for example, there is so much rampant homelessness. Homeless people, you see, are not necessarily orphans. They have parents, they have grandparents, but the problem is, why are they homeless? Because they fail to pick themselves up by their bootstraps, and they dare not go back and show their face to their parents. You see, this is so different in an Eastern society, because in an Eastern society, we prep our children for success, or I should say, we make sure that our children always have a safety net. It's true, we push our children academically, no doubt. We want them to succeed, but we always provide a safety net to catch them when they fall, because we don't believe in all this free-range parenting. But the fact of the matter is that I believe that it is not simply an East versus West cultural divide, that some people are so averse to the idea of their children living with them. You see, some people are so revolted by the idea of their children living with them after a certain age. Why? Simply because they never wanted children in the first place. They saw children, why, as simply some social obligation in order to keep up with the Joneses. So, in that sense, children themselves are seen not as people, but as a status symbol in order to show that we have a respectable nuclear Western family. But after the children reach a certain age, well, they wash their hands of their children. The relationship between them and their children is almost reptilian, I dare say. And of course, some people who have had such negligent and irresponsible parents will cope by saying that, oh, if you live with your parents after a certain age, you don't have your freedom, you know? Oh, I have so much more freedom because I moved out of the house at 19 or 20 and I never looked back. Yeah, but the reality is that many of these people who talk like that are living miserable lives. That South African colleague of mine was living in a cramped little flat. He could not have a pet. He did not have the freedom to have a pet because his apartment was so small. His landlord wouldn't let him have a pet anyway. He had barely enough room for himself. So he didn't even have the freedom to have a wife and children. So the freedom that these people talk about in many cases is the freedom to be subservient to your landlord and compliant to your boss, because your boss is your only safety net and your landlord is your source of housing. What kind of freedom is that, I ask? You think that people in Asia do not have freedom because they live with their parents? I can tell you we get along well with our parents. We get along much better than many people in the West do. But one thing you'll notice is that people who have the pet peeve of their children as adults living with them happen to be in Anglo-Saxon Protestant countries like the United States or Australia. Do you notice that? The reality is that many conservatives who like to preach about family values in order to bash down on gay people have no problem throwing out their own children when they reach a certain age, or after they found out that their children are gay. Now, an Asian parent may not like the fact that you're gay if that Asian parent is homophobic, but they're not going to throw you out, most likely. You know, I want to say that the fact of the matter is that in these countries, many people, especially in places like the Bible Belt, are only having children because they see it as a religious obligation. Be fruitful and multiply. You have people, religious conservatives like Jordan Peterson, telling people that, oh, you don't really grow up until you get married and have children. No, 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 no. Having a child is not inherently virtuous if you cannot provide a good life for this child. If you're gonna kick your child out at 18 and let them struggle and either sink or swim or, you know, die of a drug overdose, then you have no business having children, from my perspective. And no, you are not entitled to be married and have a child just because you want something, just because you want one. Wanting something does not make it your right. You want children in your right-wing Christo-fascist societies, and I could say the same about Islamo-fascist societies. You want children in order to be seen as socially acceptable. You don't care what becomes of your children when they are adults. No. You only care about how your children make you look. You only care that you get the image of a respectable nuclear family. But the reality is that you never wanted children. You only did it because you felt pressured to do so, because you were afraid that you might become ostracized and alienated by the society if you remained a childless couple. Well, I say, if you don't want children, if you see children as a burden rather than a blessing, don't have children. You know, I'm still thinking about that poor girl on TikTok who confided that her parents were throwing her out when she turned 18. On her 18th birthday, she would have to leave the house. Now, I know that perhaps in America, children are expected to mature faster than they are in Asia, right? They start going wild and experimenting with drugs and doing all sorts of debauched things, and their parents sort of like don't really care, maybe. But the thing is, an 18-year-old person is barely fully mature. You don't fully mature until you are in your 20s, for most people. I am a very different person today at 34 than I was at 24. And the fact of the matter is that many people, by the time they're 18, have not even entered university. Many people only enter university when they're 20. And even when you're 20 years old, you're not fully a mature adult. You only get enough life experience to call yourself a mature adult when you're in your mid to late 20s, perhaps your 30s. But I couldn't help but think how reptilian these parents were. How reptilian they were in saying that, oh, you know, once you reach 18, you're out of the house. That is treating parenthood like a contract, an 18-year contract in which after 18 years my responsibility is done and I wash my hands off you. Then you never truly wanted your children in the first place if you can't stand having them around you. That is my perspective as an Asian person. As an Asian person, I would love to have my children living with me. And, you know, if they don't want to, that's fine. but they will never leave my house until they get married, if they don't want to. And I could not help but think this was such a reptilian form of parenting, and that you don't feel any sentimental attachment to your children. And I was thinking, well, you notice that the countries that tend to do this sort of thing happen to be Protestant, Romanized Christian sort of countries. Yes, the fact of the matter is that you don't see this sort of thing very often, even in Catholic Italy. In Italy, it's more socially acceptable for parents and children to live together. And the fact of the matter is that you only see this in countries where people have strong religious convictions. So if you ask me, those parents, those irresponsible parents who know that their children are struggling, Jackie Chan, you two included, yeah, who know that their children, yeah, Jackie Chan's actually a disgrace to Asian parents, but those parents who know that their children are struggling and suffering and are in a vulnerable position but do nothing to help are simply irresponsible. They never should have been parents in the first place, but they chose to be parents only because they wanted children as a status symbol, to show that they were a respectable nuclear family. But they never, ever loved their children in the first place, because if you loved your children, you would educate your children, but you would not let your children fail. You would not let your children be destroyed by the world outside if you truly loved your children. You never really loved them so much as you viewed them as an investment, not a blessing but a curse to be gotten rid of after 18 years. When you irresponsible bastards have children and you throw them out of the house after a certain age, then you perpetuate a cycle of abuse, of dysfunction. They may end up throwing their own children out of the house then later on. And the cycle of irresponsibility just continues unless somebody breaks it in the family. The point is, not everyone is fit to be a parent, and that's okay. I'm not fit to be a dog owner, yeah? I don't have what it takes to be a dog owner. But so I don't go and get a dog, even though I think dogs are cute. I'll play with other people's dogs, but I will not own a dog because I know that a dog will not be well looked after. Wanting something does not make it your right. Wanting children does not make children your right, because children are a blessing, not a right. They are a blessing and should be treated as such. And yeah, it's fine if you don't want children. But if you cannot take care of children, or if you are unfit to be a parent and you only want children in order to serve as status symbols, in order to prove that you are a respectable nuclear family, don't have children. Don't. Please don't. Because you are unfit to be a parent, you are unfit to call yourself a parent, and you are no better than a reptile in your dealings with your own children. So yeah, do children have an obligation towards negligent parents? As a Confucian, I say no, because familial obligations have to be a two-way street, yeah? If your parents were good like mine, they're still alive and I still live with them. If your parents are good like mine, of course, be filial, be respectful, and observe your obligations to your parents. But if your parents were negligent bastards, and they come looking for you when they need help, when they're old and helpless, and they need your help, treat them the way they treated you. Throw them out of the house. Why should you reward this kind of irresponsible behavior by taking care of negligent parents when they've reached a certain age? Such people are a disgrace to parents around the world. And yeah, not everyone is fit to be a parent, but if you're going to be a parent, at least do your job properly. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.